I have no financial disclosures to make. However, I would like to disclaim that the knowledge and opinions presented here are purely mine, and any ignorance are also mine. These are based on 4 decades of my personal experience working in different geographical environment and different contexts, and the experience that I have gained and observed during this time. Just a little bit about what hand surgery is. It is a subspecialty in orthopedic and plastic surgery, except in Singapore, Sweden, and Norway, where it's a separate independent specialty. The skills required to perform successful hand surgery are related to orthopedic and plastic surgery, vascular surgery, and microsurgery. Skill development for hand surgery is a very prolonged period of time required to create the skills, and takes approximately almost 16 years to be able to produce the skills required, apart from 5 years in medical schools, basic surgical training, followed by specific core specialty training, which could be either orthopedic or plastics, and additional qualification for another year to 2 years in hand surgery. Within hand surgery itself, there are 6 different subspecialties, what we call super specialties of hand surgery. So it is a very arduous and long course to develop all the skills required to practice hand surgery. I like to describe my journey as a student and a trainee, and then a consultant, an educator, and a lifelong learner. I started off in Pasar Road English School, and this is my report card in Kuala Lumpur. As you can see, I wasn't really very bright. At 9 years old, I scored full marks for my position in class, i.e., the last boy in class. If you look at the training of a surgeon, I would describe it in over decades. The first decade in your training is the development of your skills, is the training and the acquisition of specific skills that are required for the practice of surgery. So I started off my career at the University of Malaya Medical Center, where I did my basic orthopedic training after my undergraduate training at the same institution. And I went on to do plastic surgical training in the United Kingdom at Mount Vernon Hospital. And then I moved on to the United States in Louisville to do hand surgery, and then coming back to the United Kingdom to train in microsurgery and general orthopedic surgery at Northwick Park Hospital, part of the MRC Research Center, to do my microsurgery research. That took about a decade. In the second decade of the surgical training is involved in the consolidation of your skills. The skills that you've acquired, you need to consolidate through a process of practice. And this second decade, I did that in the private sector, at the Subang Medical Center, and my own center, which I set up, which is now turned into an orthopedic practice in Taman Tun Dr. Smile. And so this develops the expertise and mastery level through a process of practice. For me, in the third decade, I relocated to the United Kingdom, and this was the time when the war in Iraq, and Afghanistan broke out, and our hospital became the center for the armed forces. So there was the use of my expertise that I'd gained while I'm training in Malaysia, with multiple assault wounds, with nasty injuries to the hand, which were not commonly seen in the United Kingdom. And so the skills that were acquired were suitable for the reconstruction of the victims of the war, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that is where I developed, and my skills were used. But this is also the foundation in which I was the prime mover in the establishment of the Birmingham Hand Center in the United Kingdom, which is the largest hand center. This involved training because with the experience and the opportunity that was provided for, it gave a great impetus for the development of skills for trainees who were being posted to that hospital. Today, this center has over 14 hand surgeons and trains a large number of hand surgeons in the United Kingdom. In the fourth decade of my training and my development was the relocation to Singapore in 2011. So in this fourth decade, I spent in the training of orthopedic and hand surgeons to acquire skills in Singapore, developing new pathways to improve the efficiency and quality of care being delivered. At the same time, it provided me the opportunity to work regionally to help develop skills using Singapore as the hub and creating spokes in various South Asian and Southeast Asian countries in the development of surgical skills. So my journey as an educator began in my early days, just after my graduation in my postgraduate training with the gentleman on the right, Professor P. Bala Subramaniam, who kind of forced me to do orthopedic surgery, for which I am grateful. And the other thing he infected me with was his passion for teaching, and that infected me to my teaching career and also helped me to create the pandemic to help create others who would teach. The gentleman on the left here is my Professor K. Thambiraja, who can be considered as the father of hand surgery in Malaysia. He was one of the first to be trained in hand surgery, and he was my mentor for hand surgery. And he introduced me to humanitarian activities and volunteerism, especially in Sri Lanka during the Norwegian peace process in northern Sri Lanka. And that sparked the voluntary efforts, and this also sparked my teaching. And in the center, all the trainees that I have been involved in training in the United Kingdom and also in regionally. So this provided me the opportunity to also look at alternative means of delivering teaching through the use of technology due to the context of the remoteness of training. So with that background, my focus has been on skills development regionally. I've been focusing in these areas that I've been worked over the last 10 years, especially trying to develop skills among healthcare professionals in various environmental situations to bring the skills from the classroom to the workplace. There's an old Vedic saying that says that from the mother to the father to the teacher and finally to the gods. So teacher's role in the development of an individual is significant. And I worked out this model of strategic education unit, taking a leaf from Percy Barnowick's work in ABB of the strategic business unit. And this is what I think is essential for the efficient education of a learner in any subject domain. So for us in healthcare, it is the patient, the teacher, the employer, and the learner working within the context of the environment. And to me, because of the nature in which I was involved in the development of skills, technology was crucial as it required and the ability to deliver resources remotely, and the use of mobile devices and broadband it cannot be overemphasized, and the use of electronic portfolios for the assessment and the measurement of learning was crucial. Before we can design and develop any educational program, we need to understand the learners. So as far as medical students were concerned, these were the traits that have been documented in the literature about the type of students that we are facing today. Generally, they tend to be very perfectionist, they have very high expectation, and they are very multimedia literate. They're stressed because of work-life balance, and they prefer asynchronous online learning because of the nature of their context in which they are working, as it's an apprenticeship type program in medical education where they have to work to a certain extent and study at the same time. They prefer autonomy, all in keeping with the adult learning pedagogy styles. On that background, you can see how mobile learning becomes an important aspect. Bonk, in his paper in 2009, paraphrased Anthony Fernandez, "Now everyone can fly." Basically, anyone can now learn anything from anyone at any time. And this aspect of crossover learning, learning from informal settings, are very important in adult education. And it has to be authentic with work-based platform. Mobile learning becomes extremely important, and it is very important for the subject matter experts to be aware of this as they prepare their students for learning, and the concept of just-in-time learning and the use of open educational resources for reusable learning objects is crucial in any of this postgraduate education. And this is something that every one of us has to think about in our own domain. So this resulted in my journey as a lifelong learner after finishing my master's in instructional design under Professor Apta was to continue a doctoral project on how to acquire fine motor skills among surgical trainees with the use of instructional design as a framework. And I will now present some of the findings from this research. Surgical training requires motor skills. At the end of the day, you need to perform a particular task, a motor task. And so the implications of my research were that mental skill training was crucial. And the faculty who are involved in the training of these learners should be familiar with the use of instructional design principles and the creation of multimedia resources and the use of a mental script to help create practice and therefore produce mastery. So in this research, we will look at how every index procedure requires an expert instructional video with the creation of a mental script. We will describe what a mental script is so as to be able to do mental practice augmented with deliberate practice is how we create individuals with mastery in particular skill set. So traditionally, surgery has been one of an apprenticeship model where it's one-to-one supervision, but with the current trends in reduced working hours for trainees that has started off in Europe and in the US, uh, the challenges of producing a competent surgeon within a short period of time uh, are immense, and the learning in the operating room is no longer possible due to health and safety requirements and efficiencies within the operating room. There's been a tremendous emphasis on non-technical skills, communication skills, professional skills, and which are important, but a surgeon with no surgical skills is quite useless in the work environment. And there's been enough evidence in the literature to show that a lot of trainees who come out of surgical training do not feel competent to be able to practice. And competency is not equal to excellence because it is the minimum level. But for surgeon, and especially in surgery, which is high stake work environment, you require excellence. And so this is the background that led me to do a research on how to ensure that we have mastery at the end of a training program. For mere competency, that's been shown it takes about 12 and a half years to train somebody to produce competency. However, looking at the various theoretical framework, we need to move away from just pure competency but to expertise. And we expect surgeons to be experts. And this is where the challenge has become. So how do we create expert master surgeons with a limited period of time? So in my review of the literature, I found that there are four theoretical framework that fits well with motor skill uh, training or motor skills development. The theory of motor skill acquisition of Fitz and Posner talks about the three aspects of cognitive, associative, and autonomous. So initially, it is just understanding the processes need to perform a task and then to put them together until with practice, you are able to perform it without even a second thought. And that is called neural encoding. Now, Bandura's theory of social learning showed that observational learning is crucial because it provides retention and able to reproduce and motivation. And with current cognitive neuroscience, this has been proven to be correct with the role of the motor neuron, which is a neuron that helps to see somebody doing something is just as good as doing it yourself. Erickson talks about the deliberate practice model, where you require regular reinforcement and feedback to support learning, and that can bring about with repeated attempts at it, bring about mastery. Zonrod's motor simulation theory says that the cognitive rehearsal, that means the performance of a task in the mind, is just as good as doing it in real life. And for this to occur, a mental script describing the procedure needs to be developed. So we looked at what's the evidence for mental practice. That means the ability to practice in your mind covertly a particular motor task, especially for surgical training. And we found that there was generally a lot of literature out there. It is effective for skill acquisition and retention, but it lacked methodological rigor, and there was a crucial importance being mentioned for the development of a script to describe the learner how to acquire that skill. And that mental script needs to be incorporated into a mental practice regime using the script to practice the motor task, and this is been established in the literature. With that in mind, I developed a conceptual framework for my research using the learning theories as described in the top there with the attributes and the outcomes of those framework incorporating the instructional design theory, which is at the bottom, which talks about using the ADDIE model, the design and development models, and the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, is how to create a mental script and then to create instructional video, master instructional video, and then to validate an instructional program or a module developed from this framework to validate it through an experimental model. So based on this background, I created a new model for the acquisition of expert motor skill. Once you have identified the skill that you're trying to develop in your learner, for us is a complex surgical procedure, and the outcome that you want is the learner to be able to become an expert. These are the six areas from my observation and understanding of the literature. First, you need direct observation, and through that direct observation and with the use of a mental script, an initial demonstration on how to perform with an expert so that there is haptic feedback of the particular procedure. That means they must have performed the procedure at least once to able to understand the kinesthetic component of that learning for that motor skill. Then they are able to go on to imagine that particular motor performance with the use of mental script. And once that instruction in the mental script has been learned, they practice it covertly in their mind repeatedly and augment it with deliberate practice physically, overtly in the laboratory or in the workplace, and then perform it in real world performance and assessed to the stage of expertise. So this is the tool that we developed for the from the research. That first we identify the motor tasks at hand. So once you've identified the motor task, and in our situation, my research, I use microsuturing in a rubber glove model. Then we get an expert review panel of experts who have performed this at least 5 years in an expert level to do a cognitive walkthrough of that process. How would they perform that motor task? And that is then recorded as an audio file, and this is then undergoes thematic analysis by the researcher, and through this thematic analysis to produce a hierarchical task analysis is performed. With that, a mental script is developed. We'll show you some examples later, which is then recycled back to the experts for validation. And once it's validation, this mental script is used as an audio file for the creation of a instructional module, a video. using the principles of multimedia material development, and then it is then deployed for easy access and streamed on a platform so as to produce an online uh, module which is then validated to ensure that it produces the outcome that is required. Once that is available, the learners are introduced to the motor task. That means whatever task that you wanted is they are introduced so that they have an initial kinesthetic feedback of what the task entails, and then they watch that expert video on performance, and then they are trained in motor imagery and mental practice on how to imagine that motor task which they had then been demonstrated, and then they practice it regularly, and this is then augmented with a low-cost, high-fidelity model to practice in the laboratory the tasks that they are supposed to do. And once they feel that they are ready, they can either be assessed in the workplace or they can be assessed independently against a set standards to see whether they have achieved the level of mastery. In these next few slides, I'll just show you the examples for my research, which was on how to suture using a micro instruments and a micro suture, which is the fundamental basis for microsurgery. So this is the results of our hierarchical task analysis from our expert review panel, and we have the various elements of the task on this side, the methods, tool, materials, and ergonomics. So this I don't have time to go through the details, but this is what we obtained from the expert review panel when we did a cognitive walkthrough of their expertise on performing that motor task. And so this is the details of the analysis. What are the tasks and subtasks that were involved? So cutting the edge of the glove to start, using the needle driver is used, the suture from the last stitch is cut. So these are all the detailed descriptors for the motor task that is required and how each task begins and ends. So it is deconstructed to single small items, and that is how the complex task is broken down. So this is the example of the mental script that we derive from the description earlier on. And so here is an example. So this is the detail through which we go to. So the forceps within the wound to stabilize the rubber flap, providing counter traction for needle movement. Clearly explained. Those in red require a kinesthetic component. Release the tension in the microforceps until you have a gap in the microforceps. It explains more than just performing of a task, explains the feeling, the kinesthetic cues that are required to perform that motor task, which is crucial for learning to occur. So here's if you're keen, you can see the whole video of the instructional module that was created using uh, ID principles. So it is a microsuturing course, a training module that is available on a learning management site. So we proceeded to get face and content validity, and we got very high level for the material that we created. And the script, the mental script that we created, we needed to validate it to see whether it really reflects how that particular motor task is experienced by those who read it. And we use a special questionnaire called a mental imagery questionnaire, which has been validated in previous studies to ensure that this script was valid, and our internal consistency was high with a 0.81 Cronbach alpha, showing that the mental script was valid. And this is the questionnaire, the mental imagery questionnaire that was used to ensure that the participants felt that the script truly describes the procedure was involved, and they were energized, and they felt that they could see themselves performing it just by reading the script. So, and this again had a high internal consistency. Then, when it came to the development of the instructional video, we use a storyboard technique and a slide-by-slide basis. This is an example of one of the slides. If you do have time, look at the video and you can see how it fits this. And so we use images, we use audio, and we use animation to explain the whole procedure to them. Then we validated this whole learning module and the concept of mental practice and deliberate practice, what it useful. So we used a pilot, a small group. Our sample size was small, using an experimental model, and this shows the how the experiment was conducted, with the intervention being the use of the validated learning program, including the mental script, and instructing them to follow a series of mental practice prior to the final assessment on day 13. And details are available, and I'll provide that to you at the end of the slide. Again, we found no statistical significance in time taken to perform. They were about the same. I mean, slightly better in the experimental group, but not significant. However, the quality of microsuturing, and you can see on the left, on the pink box, the type of stitching that has been done, which is not of high quality. We use a smart scale instrument, which is a validated instrument to measure the quality of suturing as an assessment tool. And on the right side, you can see how clean and how neat that suturing is. And we found there's a significant difference in the quality of suturing in the experimental group. I hope this lecture has shown you a bit of how we can provide surgical training or any motor skill training with the use of instructional design. And this new model that I described and the tool will be a useful armamentarium for you to use in creating very sound instructional materials. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you and good luck.